Welcome to the Charleston CFO Council. This organization was co-founded in 2015 by Robert Bendetti and Mark Carmichael in order to provide a networking and educational forum for senior financial executives to share best practices, to discuss current financial issues, and to learn about current topics related to the performance of their job.
All right, Michael, can you hear me, sir?
I can. Thank you, Robert.
Good morning. Thank you. And Kirk, good morning. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Robert. Doing great.
Well, I didn't tell you, but my little shtick is that I don't read the bios that you sent me. I find stuff on the internet and I reveal them to the council before you start speaking. And I don't promise that any of this is true. It could be another Michael and another Kirk, but I'm like 80%. About 80% of the time, I'm accurate. Okay. And if it's complimentary, you can just roll with it. You can say, yeah, I was a baseball player in college. That's fine. Okay. First, I'm going to start off with just PeopleSurge. PeopleSurge is a business advisory firm. And one of the tools that they provide in their tool belt is the predictive index or predictive index provider. And then I think as a user at Lifecycle Engineering, my company, it's a great tool. It's a great tool. And these are uncertain times, dynamic times, and having some major impacts on our people and on our customers, and therefore the bottom line. So I think this is really a great company, great service. I'm excited about this presentation too. Michael is one of our speakers. Michael, co-founder at PeopleSurge. Is that correct, sir?
You know it.
Undergrad in management from George Mason.
Yep.
Married, 2 kids.
All true.
Steelers fan and a Yankees fan.
You know it.
I won't hold that against you. The Yankees fan part of it. Do you play golf and CrossFit so you can drink craft beer?
I do indeed do that.
And is your predictive index profile a Maverick?
I am a Maverick profile for sure.
Everybody
Couldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, if they are that, they say it, right? You know, ooh, innovative, visionary, flexible. Like some of those other predictive index profiles, you don't share if that's what you are. So, Maverick. And all right, Kirk.
Yes.
Co-founder, PeopleSurge, undergrad in business management from the Citadel. Is that correct, sir?
That's correct.
Even more importantly and more impressive, did you get an MBA in entrepreneurship from the Kennesaw State University?
I did.
I am also a graduate of the Kennesaw State University with an MBA in entrepreneurship. So well done, sir.
Small world. Nice.
Now, Kirk, Michael only brought married with 2 kids. I'm thinking you're married with 3 kids.
3 of them, yeah. That second time around can end up being 2.
At one point, did you live in Atlanta?
Yes, 40 years.
Have you ever been to the private bar called the Crooked Brick Tavern?
I have.
Do you know Barrett Carter?
I do know Barrett Carter.
Did you borrow any tools and never return them?
Probably a few.
He says hello and thank you for donating liquor to his bar. You and I have a common friend, and he says hello. And I welcome you both. We're lucky to have you. I'm excited to hear your presentation, and I'm going to kick this back over to you guys. I'm not sure who's speaking first. I'll be the moderator and move your slides, and I'm very excited to hear your presentation.
Well, you know, Robert, as Mavericks, we're gonna go off the fly here. We're gonna ping pong back and forth. We're kind of gonna freeform this, and I say that to say that this is really your time as the council. So feel free to interrupt us at any time and use the chat box to raise your hands. And we'll also do our best to moderate our willingness and desire to be on stage, so to speak, by giving you the opportunity to ask questions during some intentional breaks. Next slide. So, as we begin to think about our time together this morning, we really want to focus on how really remote work has become the default for how business gets done, knowing that the pandemic and all of the social issues that we're experiencing now has really changed, completely changed the way we're doing business. And we wanted to take this opportunity to really introduce you to some of the resources that are available that come to really handle all that comes along with working in a remote work environment. And we also wanted to give you a new way of thinking about fundamentally, as folks that are the financial stewards of your business, we want to give you a new way to think about how remote work is really impacting your ability to deliver results for your business, knowing that you guys all set out, as business owners, as senior leaders, we all set out to achieve a certain plan at the beginning of the year, and we all know that that went out the window in early March. So most of us are teetering between the hard decisions that we need to make, or maybe we've already made some hard decisions, but ultimately we know that there are still some hard decisions ahead of us. Next slide. So I'd like to start off with just a little bit of fun with numbers here. This data, and incidentally, we're going to share with the group a report that was recently published by the Predictive Index that surveyed 220 workers. There's a ton of great data, but I wanted to share just a couple of notes here. And that is to say, 33% of the over 220 workers they surveyed had never worked remotely before. So just about a third of folks had never worked before. And if we think about that now, virtually somewhere on the magnitude of 75 to 80% of businesses are working completely remotely at this point. So we're going to talk about how those numbers ultimately impact the way business gets done. Next slide. Another fun with numbers here. 49% of workers did not regularly take part in virtual meetings before COVID. So I don't need to ask, we don't need a show of hands for certain on the number of folks that have participated in virtual meetings before. I think there's even a new phrase out there right now called Zoom fatigue. So we apologize in advance if any aspect of our presentation leads to any additional Zoom fatigue. But we really share this to say that as leaders, really being intentional about the meetings, the regularly scheduled meetings are going to be super important right now. And what's extra important as leaders, it's important that you take time to really schedule one-to-ones for your staff or those that you closely manage on a daily basis. Make them scheduled, scheduled but brief, maybe 10 to 15 minutes a week just to check in. And we also know that, the conversation may also bleed into the home life because really work and home life have really bled together. So as leaders, as you do those one-to-one check-ins, we recommend that you certainly mix in a little bit of a check-in on how things are going at home. Next slide. So we thought it would be great just to really quickly unpack, Predictive Index is a talent optimization company. One of the foundational tools that Robert mentioned is a behavioral assessment. And this slide, this visual, is really just a depiction of how we as leaders typically try and guess at what really is driving our employees and what needs they really need when we're actually trying to, if we only see their behavior, if we only witness how individuals behave, we're really trying to guess at ultimately what drives them. Next slide. So when we think about predictive index, and really this goes for any psychometric assessment, psychometric assessments really ultimately are statistically measuring, and in the case of predictive index, PI is statistically measuring the drives such that we can now have an opportunity to predict what's really driving, what are the inherent needs and behaviors that our workers need. And that's important as we think about how ultimately to deal with the vast array of folks. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the different behavioral styles in a moment. But fast forward to the next slide. So, when we think about, this is an example of the output from the PI behavioral assessment. And incidentally, as part of your participation today, we will be circulating a custom link for each of you to take the 2-question, 5-minute behavioral assessment. And ultimately, you're going to get a ton of great data. Robert, I know you've taken it before, obviously, life cycle engineering, being a predictive index client. And we like to say, so what, you have behavioral data. And if you don't understand how to use the data, that's really where folks like Kirk and myself come into play to help our clients understand how that behavioral data impacts any number of aspects of our business. Next slide. So when we think about the impacts on business, we really use this framework to really give a way of thinking about how not only the behavioral data impacts business results, but really where we as leaders have historically struggled to connect the dots between business strategy and business results. So if we think about our planning, our strategic planning sessions before we started the year, as CEOs, as CFOs, as senior leaders, a lot of us started out with a plan. We had a business strategy. We may even have had a financial plan. At the end, we had some level of desired business results. And really what this 4-step framework is designed to do is to give us a way of connecting the dots between those two. So if we think about behavioral data and its impact on business results, when we think about design, we're talking about how our business priorities have shifted, how we may have had to pivot strategically. We may have had to reprioritize some of our strategic initiatives. We may have had to redesign our teams. We may have had to go through rifts. When we think about hiring people, are we developing the right capabilities? Are we hiring the right people for the right roles? When we think about inspire, what we're talking about there is developing managers, understanding the team dynamics that remote work is now placing upon us. And then lastly, how do we diagnose? And the predictive index tool is just a tool to help us diagnose and help us understand the impacts of remote work. Next slide. So in this instance, and Kirk, I thought it would be great for you to talk a little bit about this framework, which we call our 4 forces of disengagement and its impact on remote work and ultimately uncertainty here in the business world.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I love the slide. But as Robert was playing the Journey song, when the lyric that came out was, took the midnight train going anywhere. And in this world right now, we kind of feel like even as business leaders that we're hopping on that train and we have no idea where it's going during this period of time. And this slide, I think, is at the heart of what we do, that if we can think about this from a leadership perspective and the seats that we play, creating that sense of belonging. You have a great potential for laying a groundwork for creating people and teams and an organization that becomes committed. And they'll have the sense of commitment. And the more that you can foster that with the job fit, the manager, the culture, and the team, the higher likelihood you have of moving into a sense of ownership. But unfortunately, in the world that we're in, even pre-COVID was the same, is that those four things become the factors that will pull your good people away, that will pull your organization down, that allows it not to pivot. So think about it now in an interim COVID world and trying to move through a post-COVID world. That focus becomes really important, so that we're not just on the midnight train going anywhere. If we can bring some consciousness to this space, and that slide that you brought up a few slides back, Mike, was with the sitting with that employee. I can look at that and the tools that are there. I've got so much information to know where that person's going to fit well in a remote space. What are the things they're going to drive on? What are the things that are going to be kind of their biggest barriers to adapting to a world of that? I can also see some of the coaching, some really key coaching factors when I see how they're perceiving themselves. So the power of this really brings us to a conscious space and gets away from a lot of the biases that are out there, which I can go into a whole new world. But anyway, I think this slide puts it pretty well. Next slide. We'll pause there for a moment. With all of these great minds that are on the call, I'm sure there's one or two questions that are floating around.
Yeah, I'll hit you guys up. First question was from me. So you had a slide in there a few ago that said the PI test in 5 minutes. And maybe I'm just slow, but I thought it took longer than that. Tell me about that.
Sure. Yeah, good question. Yeah, it is just 2 questions. It takes on average anywhere between 5 and 6 minutes. Most people that take it are pretty shocked at how much data and information that the assessment can provide. And incidentally, PI as an assessment, as a technology company, has been around for 65 years. So they've worked really hard at making it both accurate, statistically valid, and easy to take and easy to administer.
Yeah, and I think on top of that, with it being a free choice question, it can be used in a pre-hiring space. So it becomes very easy to use throughout the life cycle of any employee, pre and post.
Question number 2, you had mentioned that there were one-on-ones with employees, 10 to 15 minutes. Do you have any best practices around communication to employees, around mode of communication in this remote world that we live in, phone versus email versus Jabber versus video? Any thoughts?
We're actually going to touch on that in just a few slides. And a lot of the way somebody wants to be communicated with is going to be dependent on the behavioral styles, and certainly is easy for us as trained experts in PI to help understand that. So that's part of what we're doing for our clients right now on a global scale, is to look at the teams and to really give them some specifics, because it can go both on a team basis and we can get down at the individual level, because it's not just a one size fits all for everybody.
You also mentioned the different personality types. Question was, any personality types that are best or worst situated for remote work, and that we need to keep an eye out of those team members? Maybe some people need more help.
Yeah, great question. So without going into without giving everybody a lesson on PI, the tool is going to help us identify those folks. So right now, those folks that are typically more socially extroverted may really be struggling right now with remote work without that one-to-one human interaction. We're seeing a lot of folks actually thrive in this environment in 2 key areas. One, the folks that are really comfortable with freedom and flexibility around scheduling. They're loving the fact that maybe they can work for 4 hours in the morning, take a break, go work out, maybe be that caregiver to their children, maybe teach a school lesson, maybe go back to work. We're also seeing that over 32% of people are actually working more now than they did they're working more now in a remote working environment. So we certainly have the ability to point out. It would be difficult for us to give best practices without, the key data point is, as leaders, having that data to say, oh, you know what? This person on my team is going to really thrive. They're going to enjoy this. Or, hey, maybe I might need to call upon somebody to kind of draw out their ideas in a remote meeting, because they're not naturally going to raise their hand. And we have that ability to do that in a team setting, for sure.
Mike, a little aside, my company recently did a survey just to see how folks were holding up during these remote work times, because we've got about 85% of people working remote. And I was able to see it by department, and there were a few areas where I'd be able to read the comments and the scores, and I'd have 20 people in a row say they love it, they're more efficient, so much fewer interruptions.
Yes.
And see that, fewer interruptions, focused on work, not distracted, boom, boom, boom. And then there'd be one person who would say, oh, I really miss being able to walk over and talk to everyone. And so it was kind of funny that they're clearly the one person in the department who was walking around distracting everyone. And it was really obvious to figure out who it was.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. You're spot on.
I'm going to hold I got 3 other questions just for time, and let you flow through the presentation, and I'll pull them out the next time you stop.
Sounds good.
So I think the couple of things to keep in mind throughout this conversation is about intention. It's about purpose. It's about structure. It's about process. And we can do a lot of those things that can help with the flow of the world. We can help creating structures for motivation. But the things we can't change are natural behaviors of people. So we just want to be continually aware of those and conscious of them. And then we can think about how we begin to communicate and creating those accountability systems. Next slide. So let's just take communication as an example. Communicating in a remote world, communicating face-to-face is hard enough, but then try a remote world. And we have different ways of thinking about different styles and needs of each person. So we might have somebody that's patient, somebody that's flexible. And each one of those people, there's a way to communicate better. But if I just focus on the way that probably a majority of these people, and I might connect with a small minority of them. So we want to keep in mind our current way we like to communicate, and we've got to be conscious around how we communicate differently to the different styles of people. Next slide. And so a couple of things to keep in mind when it comes to communication, especially in a remote world, is that we've got to have clarity. Without clarity of intention, clarity of purpose, clarity of what we agree upon, it's hard to communicate. And then we want to keep in mind what are the different styles of how, and they're the preferred styles of the people that we're communicating to. Next slide. And some more to make this point, we can be looking at different ways that people are naturally, their natural drives. So if somebody is collaborative naturally, in this world of clarity, we want to larger picture so that I can collaborate at a higher level. And if I've got a patient drive person that's naturally patient, they're also going to want the why as well. What is the vision that we're trying to get to? Because this world right now is changing and it's been evolving, and I've been uncomfortable because I'm a patient person. So the thing to keep in mind is that without the data, we don't know how to consciously communicate with people. And we also want to be aware of our natural tendencies. Next slide.
He advanced it.
Oh, sorry.
So that's
sorry, I didn't even see it change. Sorry, it's the same. So once again, with the styles, Mike, you want to say something here?
Yeah. So when we talk about the communication styles, you get your four communication styles here. So somebody that's flexible, their communicating style to be able to achieve, to be successful, is going to be, to provide accountability. They're going to need that accountability, that structure. Someone who's patient, that's going to create a sense of normalcy, where, to Kirk's point earlier, patient folks who are not, who really aren't comfortable with change are going to need that delivery of the message such that it's coming consistent. There's nothing out of place. And certainly folks whose style is personable, they're going to look for that outlet of that social influence. And then lastly, our collaborative folks are going to want that team interaction. Let's talk this through with my team members. Not everybody has that communication style. Some folks want to be just heads down. They want to send an email. You want to get on their calendar. They don't want to be disturbed. But other folks, they're happy if you text them or if you call them or if you just pick up the phone or if there's just some kind of just-in-time communication. So, I thought on the subject of accountability, Kirk, I know the next two slides, maybe you could just touch on just at a high level, this notion of accountability and how we as managers can really do check-ins with our staff just to make sure that the work is actually getting done, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So thinking intentionally and with purpose, we can create structures and processes that allow people to thrive. And at the heart of all this is that if we can create one around accountability, that is a team sport, and we all agree what the process is and what we're being accountable for. In a remote space is that the absence of accountability systems allows for a lot of free fall and a lot of lack of communication, and their performance seems to falter. So what we found is that having some process for accountability can be very helpful. And ultimately, it's about the integrity of each individual, because I'm agreeing as a team member that I'm agreeing to something that's important for the team, and it's also important for me. And when I get off that track, that there's a system that I'm aware of that I've agreed to that we're going to go through when it comes to getting me back and getting my behaviors changed. So next slide. And so I won't go through completely on this this accountability framework, because you can lay it out and I would be happy to talk offline. But having this structure is important. But without having clarity of what we agree to and what we're agreeing, we've got nowhere to begin. So that allows for a great conversation as a manager, as a leader, to say, what are the things we're agreeing to that are important for us as a team? And we get alignment around that. And now when we get out of that, now this is a process for asking questions. Accountability does not become a punitive process. It becomes one of just motivating behavioral change because there's a structure in place. And ultimately, we're going to get to step 6, which is the consequences. And those are, you can think about that punitive, but if I'm agreeing that there's something that's going to motivate me that says that if I don't do this again, or I don't change my behavior and do what I'm about, that I said I'm going to do, then I'm going to, there's going to be some repercussion on myself that I'm placing out there. And I'm telling you that that's what I'm going to have to take on. So as an example, somebody was late to a team meeting, and she was consistently late. And one of their things they agreed upon was that we'll be on time. So they went through this process and got to the I just continually be 5 minutes late. And she was a staunch Democrat, and the team members knew that that would probably be something that might motivate her. So they said, all right, here's an option. The next time you're late, you're going to submit $10,000 to the top Republican candidate. And she was like, okay, that's enough motivation for me to now do it. And so at the heart of that, she wasn't late again, but the key is it's behavior change. There's something that we can find with each of our team members and our people when we get out of integrity with what we say is important, we can have a process for getting us back on track and changing our behavior. And ultimately, that's what the accountability framework is about.
Yeah, next slide. So just thought we'd share two more slides of statistics. This slide actually talks about the ability for these 4 different behavioral work styles and their abilities to influence others during in-person meetings versus remote meetings. So you can see here the greatest disparity here are the socially oriented work styles. They're really feeling the most tension here in their ability to get things done. And your heads down analytical folks, they're not quite as bothered by the remote meetings. But in any event, you can see that each behavioral work style is impacted and is feeling like they are less likely to be able to influence others in remote meetings. So there is a tangible impact to remote work from a management perspective. Next slide. So this one talks about, as we think about the future of work, we can see that, a lot of companies, we saw yesterday, Google just announced they are going completely virtual through the summer of 2021. I think they were the very first company to come out and put a line in the sand. So based on this study, 40% of people would be content working remotely full-time on a permanent basis. So that says to me 40% of people are comfortable with working 32% more hours than they were currently working before. Next slide. Let's take a pause just for a moment, just to answer some questions. I know we threw a lot at you there.
All right, I got 5, so I'll hit you kind of rapid fire. Short answers are okay. Earlier on, you mentioned Zoom fatigue, and if you combine that with the need for group communication, any best practices with whether it's an official business meeting or a virtual happy hour with group communication, both social and professional?
Yeah, good. So part of what we're doing for a lot of our clients right now is instilling a framework, a specific framework for the way meetings are organized. And it's really been successful for the framework to be consistent each and every time, so it's predictable, people know what to expect, and ultimately to make that time that they're meeting virtually to be productive. There's nothing worse than being in any meeting, whether it's virtual or in face-to-face, when it's not productive. So we've been working a lot with our clients to give them a specific framework on how to be productive, how to make that time together be productive.
Yeah, and also quickly, if we know somebody that has a high social extroversion, then allowing them to take control of what would be the social outlets for our team in a remote space. So knowing where their natural drives are, you bring them into the process because they're the ones that are going to enjoy it the most.
Next question. You mentioned that on average, people are working more hours right now. Do you think that's short-term or long-term? Is that a long-term benefit of allowing people to work remote, or is it a short-term because people just haven't settled into working remote?
Yeah, I don't know that we have, I don't know that I can answer that question, to be honest with you. We have just a short sample set of a couple of hundred employees and roughly 3 months of activity. So it's really difficult to say. That's a tough one. I couldn't give you an accurate answer.
I accept that. I respect that. One further question from the group on the group communication is, any tips for dealing with group communication where not everyone's getting looped in on big, important decisions?
Yeah, interesting. So, we hate to go back to those behavioral drives. And, I think part of the magic you're going to see when each of you, if you take us up on taking the assessment, some people have a need to be part of that decision-making process. There's really two types of folks. Those folks that have a really high dominance, that want to make sure that their voice and their input is heard. And then some of your high formality, your high structured folks, they're going to want to know that they want to know the information. They want to know the structure, the method to the madness. So referring back to that behavioral work styles, and when I say behavioral work styles, I'm really talking about where people are where they naturally get their batteries recharged per se. So that's really going to give you the clue for who really needs and wants to be in that communication chain, especially on big projects.
Yeah, and back to the comment that Mike was making earlier about the types of meetings. If this is a decision meeting and we're focused in on one or two things, that's a much different meeting than our check-in meetings or our update meetings that might happen 15 minutes. So for me, a lot of that responsibility flows on the manager and the leader to make sure that they are structuring the content and the agenda that's going to happen during that period of time, and have the right people on the bus that are going to be making that decision or that need to be a part of it. So we have to think a little bit different so that we can have the best out of the person that's sitting in here in this, this screen, that I can just get the best in a worst case scenario.
Last question, and I like this. I like where this person's going out. This is a big brain question. Is anyone use the principles of predictive index, personality traits, and cognitive abilities for sales or business development or capture process? Have you seen anyone use the principles of this without having your customer do an assessment, but through conversation? Picking up on their personality traits to close deals or as part of the BD process?
Sure. So is your question to say, without me knowing the behavioral style of the other person, can I use that to influence closing more deals?
Or can you, without having an official assessment? I think the person meant through conversation and the way people describe themselves or how other people see themselves. Can you make some, maybe it's dangerous, but could you use that to make kind of your own assessment just by conversation to then try to help with the sales or BD process?
You can try, back to that, the slide that we used earlier, we're really just guessing ultimately based on that human interaction. And without some of the data, it's really difficult to say what tactic would work best over another. But yes, we absolutely, when our clients have that data internally, it teaches them how to interact with another human being. So without having that data for sure, I wouldn't be comfortable saying, yes, you can, but without the data, it's really impossible. You're really just guessing at what naturally motivates the other human.
I'm gonna hold the.
But I think there's a lot to be gained from the awareness. So let's just take self-awareness. So if I have a higher level of self-awareness about myself and my natural drives, and the more that my culture is around me understanding other people around my team and the people that I'm interacting with and my leaders and my managers, that awareness can translate really well to the types of questions and the way we show up with potential clients and the way we're trying to develop that relationship. Not to the point to where we're going to be able to pinpoint their natural drives, but that awareness, that higher level of awareness, we're going to show up in the way that we ask questions, in the way that we respond, in the way that we're in that moment, in that present space, that it has an impact. I would say across the board, it has an impact with our clients and the level of awareness. Exactly their natural drives, but the way you show up and the way that our salespeople and our development folks show up, it is palpable in the way that they're there.
I'm going to hold the rest of the questions for time. We've got about 10 more minutes, and I want you to have time to move through your slides.
Yeah, no problem. So really, when on the back half of this presentation, and we'll move pretty quickly through these slides, but we just want to give you a little window into the work that we do with our clients to really help in these three areas when thinking about remote work, change, uncertainty. And that's really that leadership, from a leadership perspective, a lot of leaders are really overusing their strengths. To Kirk's point, that self-awareness, they're really using that muscle that they're really good at. Sometimes it can be overused. From an operations perspective, we're working with our clients to really realign their teams around the work that needs to be done and the behavioral styles of the folks. And then lastly, from a productivity perspective, how do we unfreeze our workers to get them unstuck? Next slide. So, this is a good indication. Most of you are in really one of these three areas. You're either surviving, you're thriving, and some of you might just be in the middle, just stabilizing. We're kind of in the middle. We know that hard decisions about priorities are coming. They may have already come down the pike, or we're preparing for them. Next slide. As we think about leading and change, we're talking about business priority shifting, and ultimately all roads lead back to our people. And the bulk of the work that we're seeing right now is really when businesses are shifting their business priorities as a whole, how can we help them quickly realign their teams? Next slide. This is an example of a 4-quadrant. This was published by the Harvard Business School. This is what's called the competing values framework. And this is to say that there are really 4 types of strategic activity. We've got our cultivating framework, so think about people. We've got our exploring framework, so think about innovation and ideas. We've got the producing framework and strategic activity, so think about results. And then from a stabilizing perspective, we get into the creating of a new process. So folks who may have a lot of stabilizers, but may need to be thinking of new ways to do things, may struggle right now. And we'll talk about that in the next few slides. Next slide. So this is just expanding on the competing values framework and the different aspects of what that framework looks like at the individual level. So the folks to the right are more external strategy focused. The folks on the upper half are more transforming. And then lastly, on the bottom, your managers, and to the left, more internal leading. What's going on internally with the company? Next slide. This is just an example of, in the PI world, there are 17 different reference profiles. So as each of you complete the assessment, we're happy to send you the report. You'll know what your behavioral orientation is. Kirk and I are mavericks right here, up in the exploring quadrant. So we're great at big picture, big ideas, coming up with innovation. And you'll be able to see where each of you would fall on this framework. Next slide. When we talk about these overused strengths, we're doing a lot of work right now with our leadership teams to really understand how to shift their natural behavioral style. So in the case of our exploring leaders, folks like us that are normally socially confident, quick to make decisions, our crisis behavioral style is to take uncalculated risks, maybe to act impulsively. So we're having a lot of coaching conversations with our leaders to help them understand at a leadership team level, there's ways that we can give them some tips to maybe perhaps discuss some ideas in private before just making them public, and really just maybe thinking about the details and how plans are going to be executed without just big, massive brainstorming sessions, which can be a big drag on a lot of different folks. So this is just one example of how we're increasing resilience for our leadership team leaders. Next slide. Again, this is just an example of some of the data output. So imagine having the data on your whole team where you could see what is the orientation of our group. Next slide. And this is just an example of, you saw those bars there. These are some of the actions to support those natural work styles. These are areas where folks might need to flex. We can actually pinpoint areas where leaders might need to delegate and or leverage maybe the strength of others on their team. And then, where are we going to not have success in a particular area based on our behavioral emphasis? Next slide. Just take a quick pause. Robert, why don't we just fast forward on? We only have a few more slides. We'll fast forward on and we'll save them for the end. So when we think about work right now, we like to say that there's really two sides of the same coin. There's the work that needs to be done and the who's doing the work. Next slide. We've got the team on the outside, and this visual that you're seeing is our ability to teach our clients using the predictive index software platform of how to recognize the team doing the work. Next slide. Then on the center, we take our clients through an exercise where we literally get down and discuss some of the shifting priorities so we can see, next slide, where do we have alignment? Where do we have alignment and where are we misaligned from a team and or leadership perspective? So we can see that behaviorally, this is an exploring team up in the upper right-hand quadrant, big picture thinkers. And as a team, they chose some stabilizing activities, creating new systems and processes, developing new systems to be more organized. Those activities aren't naturally going to come natural to these other work styles. So we're able to use some science and data and technology to help them visualize that. Next slide.
Yeah, and also just a point with that, the going through this period of time in crisis, having clients that are able to get that pulse on a consistent basis. They knew where their gaps were as they were adapting their strategies and their tactics for them to understand who was going to need to take some of that heavy load during the crisis period.
And Robert, if you want to forward to number 42, we'll just talk, so really the bulk of our work when we're working with our clients is really, we're sitting in that, how do we assess where the team is really quickly? We take our clients through a 90-minute exercise. This is both for prospects and clients. We're happy to walk you guys through a little exercise where you can quickly identify, we'll just say the DNA of your team. We'll map that against some real-world activities that you're trying to accomplish right now, and then help you work through the challenges. Where are you aligned, and where are ultimately the gaps? I know I've said a lot. We're just coming. I want to be mindful of giving folks enough time here for questions. So why don't we advance to the next one, Robert, and we'll just open up the floor for questions.
Final question, I'm going to take just one of them, is you mentioned eliminating unconscious bias during the hiring process. Could you speak a little bit to that, how the predictive index could be used to help in that way?
Sure, we can probably. So when you think about the predictive index assessment is a free choice 2-question assessment. There are no socioeconomic, no gender, no religious, no ethnic biases built into the assessment. So it is therefore able to remove any biases built into the natural selection process. We also help our clients design the roles behaviorally, meaning how do we actually get buy-in from maybe 3 or 4 folks on the hiring team to agree on the targeted behaviors. And we're actually able to screen candidates then against that target in a really easy to use fashion. Hopefully that answered your question. And Kirk, is there anything else that you wanted to say about that?
Yeah, I'll add to it. So we're trying to add as many tools to the process as possible to limit our biases that might get in the way. So in addition to one-to-one interviews and team interviews and culture interviews, now let's add a tool on top of that has sorted through what is the natural behavior of a person, so that we can go into that with high confidence that the behaviors of this person align to the behaviors.
Mike, I don't think the internet wants to hear from Kirk.
Yeah. So I think he was going to say we can go into the interview process with high confidence that we're really seeing the candidate. We're really able to connect with that candidate on what naturally drives them, and removing any bias that we might have about where they worked, how long they worked, where they went to school, and also how old they might be. We're able to remove all of that biases and even any kind of generational biases as well.
Well, Michael and Kurt, thank you very much. That was absolutely fantastic. I got a bunch of other questions I'm going to hold, but I'm going to provide your contact information to everyone. So if there's any follow-up questions, they can reach out to you directly. I think that this was a great presentation and introduction into the principles provided, including the predictive index. When I started at Lifecycle, I thought maybe it was a little hokey, but as I got to learn more about it and read the book, I realized there's a lot of science behind it. This is not the Myers-Briggs assessment, which is a total malarkey. There's no science behind that. There is behind this, and great principles similar to maybe the 5 love languages. If anybody got that book when they got married, that it's important to speak to others the way they want to be spoken to, interact with others the way they want to be interacted with. I find the PI to be a tool in my tool belt, one part of a way for me to help interact with team members. And to your point there, Michael, also a way to narrow down when I have a couple of really high candidates and people are technically similar, experience similar, they probably could both do the job, to have a data-driven tool.
Yes.
So that I can make a decision, how will these people fit with the rest of my team with no bias. I can see the personality. I think is great. So thanks for sharing this with the whole group here. Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome, Robert. And just one final note, we're offering the complimentary assessment for anybody that's participated today. And we're also going to be sending the report out. Robert will be circulating the report that we referenced here with a bunch of other data. It's some interesting statistics about remote work.
Awesome. We'll close on that. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Kurt. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you, Robert.